for Gent by Honeywell, been there 23 years. And I'm the business manager for the Midlands and East Midlands, West Midlands and Ireland and East Anglia. And today's presentation is kind of, luckily for you, I'm not speaking too much, it's based on videos, about 4 or 5 videos, kindly loaned to us from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. And it's looking at a fire that occurred in Scotland a few years ago, and looking at what went wrong and why that was allowed to, well, you'll see. Quite a shocking video. There's some scenes that are quite upsetting. Even though it is animated, it's not like you're going to see real life people burning. So yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for giving me time to listen to it. So the agenda tonight, we're going to look at the CPD based on the Rose Park fatal accidents. Anyone heard of the Rose Park crime before? It is quite famous in the fire kind of circles, if you're into that. But yeah, we're going to look at that. We'll look at what went wrong, why it was allowed, why it went to the degree it went. Looking at the latest legislation and standards that go around with that, not too much detail. But we're kind of governed, certainly in the fire industry, under BS 5839 Part 1. You've all got, I think you've all picked up some guides. If you haven't, there's some guides there, just give you a brief overview of what's in there. We're going to look at documentation and responsibilities of everyone involved in the fire alarm system, not just the designers, but also the installers, the maintenance team, and ultimately the end user. Their main responsibility. And then we'll look at some pictures of getting it wrong. And you'll be gobsmacked at how wrong people can get things. But there's evidence, and we'll look at that. Some big companies as well. Okay, some key stage to consider on any fire alarm system going ahead from at least 2006 when the regulatory reform order changed or came out. The key thing, and I will say, I'll apologise now, I will talk about it a lot, is a risk assessment. It is a key document on any fire alarm system. Certainly from that it will give us some sort of design guidance, and we need to design any fire alarm system with BS 5839 Part 1 2013. It's the latest standard. Okay, 2008 it's gone, 2002 I think it was before that, definitely gone. On that risk assessment, you also need to identify the category of system. That's key. We're going to look at categories a bit later on, so just give you an overview of that. Hopefully it'll bring out a fire.
Just on a risk assessment, who should do that?
The risk assessment is the responsibility of the responsible person, which we'll cover, okay? But it's a named person who is responsible for that, usually the end user or occupier of a building, okay?
Because they will normally throw it over to the designers.
Yes, which they can do as long as they note it, and they've done that, and it's their responsibility to make sure the designer is doing it correctly. The designer won't do the design correctly, they won't do the risk assessment, which brings up a lot more than just design a fire alarm system. Need to look at some other standards, 7273 Part 4, we'll cover that in a bit. When I say that, most people go, never heard of it. It's actually quite an important standard, and we'll give you a brief overview of what it's about. Need to make sure the systems that you have got installed is commissioned with full cause and effect, and it's tested and it works, because that's what the client's paid for at the end of the day. Make sure staff are trained on how to use the kit and how to carry out drills. Okay, I'm emphasising that because that plays a big part in what you're about to see on the videos. Make sure the system's maintained correctly, because it's great paying all this money for a fire alarm system, but if it's not maintained correctly, your fire alarm system can fall after 3 months. It's no longer working. And obviously adapt the fire system and the risk assessment as the building changes. Okay, people say how often should I do it? Whenever the building changes. No, some people say yeah, but at least look at it every 6 months if nothing changes. But if the building changes daily, look at your risk assessment daily. It's kind of a key thing to all of this. Okay, so what we're going to have a look at now is we're going to set the scene about this Rose Park. It's a care home in Scotland, and it is typical of every sort of care home or building you'd have seen built in the 1990s. You look at this and it could be 2 miles down the road, or Cornwall, anywhere in the country. It's a typical 90s building.
Rose Park Care Home Case Study, based on the findings of a fatal accident inquiry by Sheriff Brian Lockhart. The fatal accident inquiry was conducted between 2009 and 2010. The Sheriff Principal's determination from the FAI was published on 20th April 2011. This case study focuses on the tragic events on the 31st of January 2004, in which a fire in a care home killed 14 elderly residents. The main aspects of this study will provide information on the overview of the care home, the call to the fire service, the internal layout of the care home and its failures in fire safety, how the fire started and spread, And finally, the actions of the care home staff and fire service on the night. Rose Park Care Home, built in the early 1990s, opened its doors in February 1992 and catered for residents of varying dependency. It is situated in the Uddingston area of Lanarkshire. The building is positioned within the local community and is split over 2 levels, with accommodation for its residents spread over the 2. It has a capacity for 43, 18 on the upper level and 25 on the lower. In its construction, there were no statutory requirement for sprinklers to be installed within care homes, and none were installed. The statutory requirement to carry a fire risk assessment had not been carried out. This should have identified worst case scenarios, fires at night, means of escape and emergency procedures for staff to follow. With the care home constructed on a sloping site, the lower floor starts halfway towards the rear of the building. The main entrance to the building is on the upper level. The rear access to the building is on the lower level, which is through a gated entrance. A lane runs parallel to the side of the building, which gives access from the rear gate to the main entrance. The postcode given to the care home, G716LL, is situated on New Edinburgh Road, which is the rear access to the building. The distance from Bells Hill Fire Station is 0.7 miles, and the journey time by blue light is 109 seconds. Failures in fire safety played a critical role in the deaths of the 14 residents. This shows the internal layout of the 2 floors within the building. On the upper level, the main entrance to the entrance foyer is located here, with offices just off it. The dining area, kitchen and lounge are located here. Accommodation is positioned off the corridors with access to the lower floor by stairs and lift. The sub-electrical switch is located in the cupboard. On the lower floor, there are exits from the building. There is further accommodation on this level, the boiler room and the sub-electrical switch.
Okay, so as I say, very basic overview of the building, and it's, as I say, typical of buildings you see day in, day out, I suppose. A couple of things to take away from that is, one, the address that they gave there. I can't remember, not remember off the top of my head, but you'll see that postcode appear many times in the next couple of videos. And also that it takes the fire service under 2 minutes to get there. Kind of key points that you'll need to seriously go through. So, risk assessment. Despite there being elderly occupants in the building and it being a sleeping risk, a major sleeping risk, it's obviously a care home, okay, the video stated there was not a risk assessment carried out. In fact, there was a risk assessment carried out, but it was deemed insufficient and didn't have enough information on it. Okay, so that's the first kind of thing that's gone wrong. The information that they require for this building is not sufficient to look after the occupants in there. And some of the things it mentioned there, the worst case scenarios, you know, fires at night, for example. Well, as you see, what happens when you do have a fire at night? So, current legislation. Back in 2005-2006, there's approximately 118 bits of legislation that me as a fire alarm designer, and you guys if you design fire alarms, would have to have knowledge of. Okay, so there's the Gambling Act, that's got a bit of fire legislation in it, so you'd have to know that. If you're the stadium legislations, you have to know about that, and there's things with animals as well, there's animal houses, you need to know the fire legislation. Well, it was absolutely ridiculous for anyone to expect to know all of that, so it all got repealed, moved out of the way, replaced with just 3 simple documents. Okay, there's the Fire and Rescue Services Act 2004, okay, which many people are aware, but that's an important document. There's the Equality Act 2010, formerly the DDA, and the majority of people still refer to it as DDA. It's not been that now for 5 years, but DDA, Equality Act, same thing really. And then obviously the Regulatory Reform Order, but for me the important bit, and for us, is the fire safety part of that. Okay, don't know if anyone's ever read the Regulatory Reform Order. It's about 1,500 pages. You can download it and read it at your leisure. But yeah, it's up to you. So what does the Regulatory Reform Order do? What does it state? Well, I've picked out the main points from the fire safety part of it. It identifies the need to carry out a full risk assessment. Okay, it's legislation, you have to do that. We've talked about lots. If you are the owner occupier of a building, you need to do that. It identifies the responsible person. This isn't kind of on behalf of a company or the company is responsible. It is a named person. Okay. There we go. Owners and occupiers are responsible for providing the provisions of ongoing maintenance of the appropriate firefighting and fire detection equipment. Okay. The Fire and Rescue Service remain the enforcing authorities. They have the rights to come and inspect, see the risk assessment. You'll see what happens when they do and you haven't got one. And any offences under the new Act will hold the responsible persons accountable. And that really does mean a named person will be in court explaining why they have or haven't followed the standards correctly. So, BS 5839 Part 1 got revised in 2013. One of the revisions in there is the responsible person, known as premises management now, just to confuse things even more. And it says, I'll read it out, persons having a day-to-day control of the premises, the fire detection and fire alarm systems, and the implementation of fire procedures. So it's a named person that has those responsibilities. And without risk assessment, it will name that person. Okay, if it doesn't, it's not a fully certified risk assessment. And then it just says down there that responsible person changed the name to premises management in that standard. The strange thing is the regulatory form order still refers to it as the responsible person. So either, same person. Okay, it's just the BS clarifying their version of it. So the user responsibility. So under section 7 user responsibility within the BS, it states premises management is a single named member of the premises management should be appointed to supervise all matters pertaining to the fire detection and fire alarm system. This person should normally be the keeper of the documentation as described in clause 40. We'll cover documentation in a bit. And should be given sufficient authority to carry out the following duties. Okay, and these are quite key items. Ensuring where necessary a suitable diagrammatic zone plan is displayed and kept up to date. That's one of the major changes that you see in the BS. It used to be a zone chart, and that was easy. It could be written, whatever. It now states diagrammatic. It has to be diagrammatic. Okay? And you'll see why a bit later on, why it has to be diagrammatic. But interestingly, under variations within the standard, that is now classed as a major variation, if you haven't got that. So it's not just a straightforward variation, it's a major variation. Okay? So you have to have them. And it would be value of the premises management to be aware of the policy of the relevant firefighting services with regard to response from call-outs from any ARC in the event of the operation of the fire detection alarm system. Bit long-worded. What it really means is if you're the responsible person within a building or you're the ones in charge of ringing the fire service or fire alarms rings the fire service, all it's saying is before there's a fire, so when you receive your building, when you've got your fire alarm, when you know what's happening, give the fire service a ring, your local fire service. 5 minutes on the phone explaining to them, if there's a fire, here's where you turn up, here's where you'll be met. What information do you need from me as an end user? The reason being, as you'll see, under the duress of fire, it's quite easy to get things wrong. And we'll see that in the video. A lot of things are building up here as to what could go wrong and what did go wrong. So it really is just a 5-minute phone call to the fire service. What information do you need from me as an end user? What should I give you when you get here? Okay? So the current standards, I'm not going to go through them all just to make you aware. BS 5839 Part 1 2013 is the key one for fire. It's a code of practice for designing fire alarm systems in commercial premises. There's also, if you deal with hospitals, the HTM 0503, which replaced the old HTM 82, and that's for any NHS premises. Okay, and it overrules the BS 5839, but should be read in conjunction with it. And there's some other standards there. Part 6 is for dwellings, housing multiple occupation. There's code of practice for voice alarms, emergency voice communication systems, or disabled refuge, as people refer to them as, aspiration detectors, and door release units, which is the one we'll cover a bit later on. Okay. So we're now going to have a look at the video of what went wrong. So through this, you'll see the nursing home, you'll see inside the care home, and see if you can spot some of the obvious things that you probably see day in, day out, but you never bat an eyelid, but obvious things that you think are amiss. There is commentary.
This is a photograph taken of the actual alarm panel. It was a new panel which was recently installed prior to the fire. None of the staff were trained on how to interpret the information from it. Staff on duty that night had never received any fire drill training, and there was no written evacuation plan. The alarm zone plan contained text only and no plan showing each area within the building. The text provided was ambiguous and confusing. Zone boundaries did not align with fire compartment boundaries. On the upper floor, the zones were split into Zone 1 at the front entrance, Zone 2 in the middle, and Zone 3 at the rear. Fire alarm zones crossed the fire boundaries. The fire doors were ill-fitting and left gaps. There were breaks in roof space compartmentation. Fire dampeners were not installed in the ventilation system. This allowed smoke to pass through unobstructed to each outlet in the building. Bedroom doors were routinely wedged open or had their self-closers disabled. There was a number of items stored and left in the corridor, such as tables, bath and wheelchairs. There was extra load placed on the electrical system as a result of the washroom. The cupboard doors were not locked shut. This cupboard housed the sub-electrical switches. Also stored here were combustible materials and aerosol cans.
Okay, so it gives you an overview of some of the things there that were wrong. Anyone want to shout any out? Any glaring, obvious ones?
Well, the biggest one was the electrical switch room with that massive fire load and oxidising.
A bit later on, you'll hear something else that's stored in there as well, which makes it even worse. But we've been through. We've put a list together. Just some of the most obvious ones, but you're right. Start from the very start. Zoning on the panel was incorrect and confusing. Okay, that's the first thing. Fire detection zones cross fire compartment boundaries. Big no-no. Limited staff training and evacuation plan. The video states none, but we believe there may have been some training, as in there's a fire alarm. Doors wedged open and fire doors had gaps. I mean, doors wedged open, how often do you see that in any building? And it's worth paying attention to that, because later on you'll see who had the doors open, who had them closed, and who survived. So it plays a key part. Breaks in the roof space compartmentation. No dampers in the ventilation shafts, and you'll see, helps smoke spread quite easily. Obstructions in corridor, that's another one you see day in, day out, and no one really does much about it. Well, actually, when you've seen this video, you'll change it. If you see something, you'll bring it to someone's attention and say, that door's wedged open, something in the corridor. Additional load placed on the, I think it was a bio washroom, I think he said. That is, big washing machines. There's additional electric load and combustible materials stored next to the electrical switchboard. Okay, I mean, maybe it's the architect's fault for not putting enough cupboards in, I don't know, but there you go, that's why that cupboard was there. A bit later on you'll find out that they actually stored toilet rolls within that cupboard as well. Okay, so one of the things we noticed in there was the electrical riser cupboard door was actually left undone. Okay, they normally have a plaque on that says fire door keep locked. It isn't, and when I do surveys, sometimes it's a bit of a saviour, because you can open the door and you can actually stick it up, see if they dampen at every level or the detection there. But actually, they should be kept locked, and the reason the plaque's on there is to tell you they should. So that's some of the things that went wrong. There's a lot more. I mean, on their own, a lot of those things you see day in, day out, you don't really pay much attention. But actually, put them all together, put a fire in amongst it, and the fire soon spreads. So now we're going to have a look at the extract of the actual fire. So what we're going to see in the top corner will be a timeline. That's the timeline of the fire. We're going to see what the staff were doing, we'll see what the fire service were doing, and we'll see all sorts of things. As I said, the fire service could get there in 2 minutes, and that's worth listening out for.
The fire started at 4:25 a.m. in the cupboard on the upper floor. This was due to arcing activity occurring at the cabling in the electrical switch. The arcing occurred at the cable to the laundry room. Incendiary sparks were ejected onto the surrounding combustible material. The fire took hold of the material and spread throughout the cupboard. The cupboard door was not correctly shut, allowing smoke to enter the corridor. The aerosol cans exploded due to heat from the fire. The cupboard doors were blown wide open and smoke billowed out into the corridor. Smoke quickly filled corridors 4A and 4B. The self-closing fire door between corridor 3 and 4A, which was held open by a magnet, would have de-energised on the actuation of the alarm. It is understood that this was almost certainly in working order. It would have closed on first alarm, but was ill-fitting and left a gap. Breaks and compartmentation within the roof space contributed to the spread of smoke across fire breaks. By this point, smoke had filled most of Zone 3. Rooms which had their doors wedged open or their closing mechanism disabled would have been completely filled by smoke. Due to high concentration of asphyxiant gases, the residents within would have succumbed to the toxicity. Only 2 of the doors in this area were closed. The residents of these rooms survived in the initial fire but later passed away in hospital. Smoke spread through the ventilation system due to the lack of fire dampeners. Between 7 and 10 minutes, fire would have been at its most severe. Those that perished in the care home that night would have by this time. This was 14 minutes after the ignition of the fire and 3 minutes before the arrival of the first firefighter. All fatalities had their bedroom doors open. 2 residents who had their doors closed in corridor 4 and 2 residents in corridor 3 who had their doors open died later in hospital. At 17 minutes, the fire service arrived on scene. The fire was almost out by now due to the lack of oxygen. Prior to the fire, staff were involved in general care duties, including changing dressings and putting residents to bed throughout the home. There were no reports of residents smoking in their rooms, nor had there ever been. A member of staff retrieved a toilet roll from the cupboard of fire origin. On the lower floor, there was an agitated resident who required assistance from the staff. Fire started at 4:25 AM after arcing in the electrical switch room on the upper floor. This subsequently ignited the combustible material contained within the cupboard. While administering care to a resident who had bumped their head, staff heard the fire alarm and made their way to the fire panel. Additional staff members joined the others at the alarm panel. There is confusion over the correct zone shown on the panel. It was a new alarm. No one was familiar with it and they were unsure over what the staff's actions should be. A male member of staff thought the matron said the fire was in the area they were occupying, which further added to the confusion. One female member of staff checks the rooms from the alarm panel up to the lift shaft. 2 female members of staff check the lower floor and are joined by the 3rd female staff member shortly after. They find no signs of smoke or fire in any of the rooms on the lower floor. The 3 female staff members go back to the alarm panel to join up with the male member of staff. He thought that the matron said it must be a false alarm. He then checks the rooms in the vicinity of the alarm panel and subsequently some residents are then moved into the day room. The alarm panel is reset by staff and immediately reactuates. The male member of staff continues along corridor 2 towards the lift area and sees dense smoke. He and a female member of staff then try to help residents on the upper level by proceeding to the fire stairs on the lower level. They are prevented from using the fire stairs due to smoke and can hear the sounds of fire behind the door. They begin to waken residents on the lower floor in order to evacuate them. Matron makes the phone call to the fire service. Knowing the gates are locked at the rear of the building from New Edinburgh Road, she mistakenly says to enter by Rose Park Gardens. The correct approach should have been Rose Park Avenue. The evacuation of residents continues. Due to the effects of smoke inhalation, those that perished in the care home itself have done so by this time. Corridor 2 is cleared of residents who have moved into the day room. 17 minutes after the fire started, the fire service first arrive at the incident. The staff misinterpreted the alarm information and advised the initial officer in charge that the fire was in the lift shaft on the lower floor and that 2 members of staff were also down on the lower floor. Closed-circuit television recorded staff directing the OIC to the lower floor. There was no communication with the staff on the lower floor and their status was unknown. Fire service was in attendance 5 minutes after the call had been made and 17 minutes after the fire had started. The initial officer in charge was advised by staff that the fire was in the lift shaft in the lower level. There was no reason to doubt the staff's information as it was consistent with what he had gathered from his own observations. He was then advised that there were residents on the lower floor who were unaccounted for and that 2 members of staff had gone down to evacuate them. There was no communication with the staff on the lower level and their status was unknown. BA Team 1 was assigned to the lower floor. The residents on the upper floor had not been evacuated. A person's reported message was sent. Firefighters have not entered the corridor where the fire is. The officer in charge believes that the fire is contained to the lift shaft due to the recommended level of fire resistance that should have been in place. BA Team 1 on the lower floor found the residents and staff and tried to evacuate via the fire exit on the lower floor but are unable due to heavy smoke blocking. BA Team 1 turn back and make their way out the building via the exit on the lower floor by the lift shaft. 16 persons in total were rescued from the lower floor. During this time period, 3 residents were also removed from their rooms in Corridor 2 on the upper floor. BA Team 1 then returned to the far stairs and proceed up to the upper floor and commence a right-hand search. Assistance message, Make Pumps 3, enter via Rose Park Avenue, was sent. Officer in charge is now aware that the fire is not contained to the lift shaft and that smoke has spread beyond this. Staff were unable to provide the OIC with accurate information as to who has been rescued and who was still missing. The first ambulance arrives at the incident. On the upper floor, BA Team 2 proceed to carry out a search and rescue from the lift shaft into Corridor 3. They zigzag from room to room, finding residents in each. A second ambulance arrives at the incident. BA Team 1 proceed along Corridor 4B from the far stairs and search each room, finding several casualties that show no signs of life. They attempt to rescue a casualty who showed signs of life but became entangled in collapsed ventilation ducting that was hanging down from the ceiling. BA Team 1 are released with the assistance of BA Team 2 and the casualty is removed via the front entrance. A third ambulance arrives at the incident. Assistance message, Make Pumps 4 is sent. BA Team 1 are instructed to remove the earlier casualties showing no signs of life. They remove one more casualty before withdrawing due to low pressure warning whistle and physical exhaustion. BA Team 3 now enter Corridor 3 and search all rooms from the lift shaft, rescuing one casualty. They then continue searching and discover the fire's point of origin. They extinguish the smouldering fire in the cupboard using a hose reel. They then continue to search for casualties, but find none showing any signs of life. They return to Baco to report their findings. At this point, 42 out of the 44 residents and staff have been accounted for, and 9 fatalities have been identified. 7 are left in situ, 2 have been removed to an empty room away from the residents who have been rescued. BA Team 4 enter and begin searching all rooms from the lift shaft onwards. They ventilate each room as they proceed. Assistance message, Make Pumps 6, several possible fatalities, is sent. No appliances that are mobilised following this message take any active part in firefighting or search and rescue operations. BA Team 4 find a further 2 residents, one showing signs of life and one suspected fatality. Both are removed and this is the last casualty to be removed by fire service personnel. BA Team 5 enter. Time of entry is not clear from the fatal accident inquiry. They are initially told to remove fatalities, but this brief is changed and they are then told not to remove any of the remaining 7 fatalities.
Okay, so it's quite hard to follow that up, to be honest, after you see everything that's gone on. As I said before, it's quite shocking, the whole kind of series of events. Things that you wouldn't expect to happen did happen. Some of the major points there was, it took 17 minutes for the fire service to get on site. More shockingly, it took them 12 minutes to even ring the fire service, which is just beyond belief. Someone reset the fire alarm panel without understanding why they're resetting it. And it's just one thing after another. As you said, I don't know if everyone picked up the people that died. Okay, they died later on in hospital anyway, but actually the people that were saved initially were the ones that had the doors closed, because that's what a fire door is for. Another point worth bringing up is that the fire pretty much self-extinguishes. It ran out of oxygen. But actually, if that cupboard door had been shut and hadn't been able to blow open with the initial impact, it may have starved itself out originally anyway and not actually spread throughout the building. So, hard to say, really. There's so much happened there, it's hard to take it all in. But if the legislation had been followed, the legislation that's now in the British standards, the reason it's there is because of this fire. A lot of it changes. If the zone panel wasn't confusing, if it had been correct, if the detection zone's been correct, if the doors hadn't been wedged open, if the dampers were fitted in the ventilation, if the electrical load, the additional electrical load had been tested correctly, would it have happened? Hard to say, impossible to say, isn't it? But I tell you what, a lot of it could have been cut down. The fire may still have occurred, but actually it would probably get out a lot quicker, maybe there are a lot less fatalities. So what is a competent risk assessment? What do we look for in a risk assessment? Okay, so what does a risk assessment have on it? It looks at the building, the construction, the size, taking into account the whole of the building. Looks at the occupants and special need risks, if there's any in there. So is it elderly? Is it sleeping risk? What sort of people are going to be in that building? Look at previous loss experience. Is their building similar, got up in flames before? What was learnt from that? What do we know? Look at the fire hazards, and this is a key one. Fire hazards from ignition sources to actually flammable materials. We went to a job a couple of months ago and someone said, we need a fire alarm system putting in because we've got this really flammable kit here and we've got this quite serious ignition source. So I was like, do they have to be in the same room? No, we could move them. Well, I suggest you move them and therefore the risk is kind of gone. You haven't got an ignition source next to a highly flammable piece of equipment. Oh, never thought of that. So actually, just looking at the most obvious can save a lot of money on these situations. If it does want a fire protection system, fire detection system, make sure it's correct. What emergency lights do we need? What signage do we need? Okay, all needs to be taken into account. The key one first, certainly for myself, is to look at the category of fire alarm system that's required in that building. Is it a manual system? Is it a category P system? Is it a life system? And we'll look at those in a bit. Fire dampers, fire compartmentation, training of staff. Okay, kind of key. People overlook that, and it's normally half an hour before the commission engineer leaves. He goes, oh, there's a silence power. But actually, a bit more time should be given to that. They're the guys that are going to have to look after that system when the specialists have gone. Procedure and drills and servicing. I mean, the fire drills. Legislation says there should be a fire test every week. How often is that done? Don't know. An emergency action plan. Okay, people say a fire plan, but actually emergency. Fire alarms, yes, for fire, that's its primary use, but actually people use them for emergency procedures as well, bomb alerts, that sort of thing. So what happens in the event of an emergency?
Just like to add what you're saying there, that the general practice now, we don't have a fire plan, it is just an emergency plan of which fire is just one of those emergency situations. Okay. And we totally support you in that approach.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a bit of a hard one. We see people asking fire systems to do more and more, but actually its primary function is to detect fire and get people out. That is what it does. But we ask a lot to, can you do damp control on it? Well, we can, but trust me, when a fire alarm panel is in its full flow and there's major cause and effect, the last thing it's thinking about is your dampers. It's trying to get people out of a building. But it is one of the key things we're seeing. So, categories of system, I'm not going to try and teach this, okay? I'm just going to give you a basic overview of the categories, the 5-6 categories. First category you can have is M. Okay, we're only going to talk about life categories here because we'll talk about care home. But M system means manual call points. Obviously, we have sounders throughout the building to the correct levels. I'm not going to put them on because we clutter the drawing up. Manual call points, that is a category. You can have that. Manual call points on every exit to the open air. It doesn't matter if it's a fire escape or not. Every exit to the open air. And the reason it doesn't matter if it's fire escape, if there's a door that hasn't got a fire escape above it, and you're in a fire or you see a fire, you're not going to go back into the building to find a door that's a fire escape. You're going to go out that door. Okay, so it needs to have a call point there. Then exception is if it goes into an enclosed courtyard outside. So you've got out of the building, you're outside, but actually you've got to go back into the building to get out. Also areas of high risk, hence we've got one in the kitchen there because kitchen's quite bad places for fire. There's gas in there and there's definitely flames. So yeah, that's the first one. The next one is L5, category L5. It's worth saying on all these L categories, life categories, call points stay throughout now. Okay, so category L5, high risk areas. It's really dependent on the way the building, the construction of the building. And L5 is an impossible one to do without a risk assessment. Okay, the risk assessment should highlight the areas of high risk and the areas the additional devices need to go in. So in this case, someone says the prep area, the boiler room, and the electrical room are the high risk areas. That would be an L5 system. Okay, an L5 system could also be a top of the range one with a couple of detectors removed. Okay, it's down to the building, down to the risk assessment, down to the people looking at how it's going to work. The next one, hopefully, is L4, escape routes, and escape routes only. First thing to notice is the high risk areas have gone. We're not interested in those under L4. And it also shows on this drawing, because people will say, oh, that's a escape route as well. So we'll come on to those couple of areas. But L4 is escape routes early. It's giving residents in that building early warning that those escape routes are going to get blocked up. Okay, so it's letting people, giving them a chance to get out of the building. Under L category, all escape routes should be covered by smoke because it's protecting people from smoke inhalation. Okay, so a couple of areas that aren't covered in here that in theory are a escape route is probably the kitchen. If you're in the prep area, you've got to go through the kitchen to get out, and therefore it's an escape route. But escape routes can only have smoke in them. The last thing you want to do is put a smoke detector in a kitchen because it will go off, guaranteed. So you could go with heat detectors in there and put it as a variation and explain why. Okay? And some people say these rooms down here. I didn't see the risk assessment, so I don't know. Okay, next one is L3. Identical to L4, so you're covering escape routes, but you're also now covering rooms off of escape routes. Okay, but you're not actually covering those rooms, you're covering the door, so it's even earlier one than before. You just don't want smoke to get out through the escape route onto the escape route. So, it doesn't matter how big these rooms are, you'll need one detector near the door. Okay, that's all you need. L3 is the only category that you can mount a smoke detector on the wall above the door. Okay, because you're properly only protecting the door itself. And then we come on to L2. And L2, the easiest way of saying it is it's an L3 plus L5. Okay, so whatever detection is required in L3 plus the areas that are required under the risk assessment classed as high risk areas. Okay, and the very last one, the one if you don't know what you're doing, is L1. Total coverage of detection everywhere within the building. Okay, there's also P category systems. We're not going to cover those, but the British Standard, and I think those booklets may even tell you what category P systems are. Any questions on that? Excellent. Okay, we're now going to have a look at the call to the fire service themselves. So we've already heard that she's got the confused address. The nurse gives the wrong address. We also know that there's a different postcode. So it's worth noting, as we can have the sheet, how many different addresses there are on there.
The call to the fire service was made at 4:37 a.m. and was handled by Strathclyde Fire and Rescue's Operations Support Centre in Johnston. The initial turnout sheet contained substantially more information than normal. Critical information was located further down the turnout sheet than would have normally been expected. This additional information detailed how appliances should enter by Rose Park Avenue. This was different to the address provided at the top of the turnout sheet, which directed appliances to the rear of the building. The PDA for this premises was 2 appliances. On this occasion, 1 appliance was mobilised from Bells Hill and a second from Hamilton. The first appliance arrived at the rear of the care home on New Edinburgh Road. The incident commander decided not to gain access to the main entrance via the lane. This was due to the sloping site and the risk of the appliance colliding with the eaves of the building. The incident commander climbed the gate, which was closed and locked. As he made his way up the lane, he noticed smoke issuing from a lower storey window. The appliances were relocated to the main entrance at Rose Park Avenue. At the main entrance, there is a small car park and easy access to the alarm panel. This was where staff would have expected to meet the fire service. Okay,
so very short video, but as I say, we saw in the very first video, she gives you the wrong address, and actually the address that the fire brigade have got is to the rear of the building, which is a locked gate. I'm sure a locked gate doesn't put fire service off, they'll just go straight through it. But as I say, it is different from where they were expected to turn up. So that's why we said at the very start, it's worth just a 5-minute call to the fire service and what and where do you think you should turn up. So, hopefully. So communication with the fire and rescue service, and I apologise, I'm going to read this out now, straight from the British Standards, what it states in 2013. Since the objective of a Category L system is the evacuation of occupants rather than protection of property, manual summoning of the fire and rescue services by occupants may again suffice. However, if the early attendance of the fire and rescue service is likely to be essential in life safety in the event of fire, e.g. hospitals, a secondary automatic means of transmission may be warranted or might be warranted unless there are adequate arrangements to ensure that there will be no delay at any time in manual summoning of the fire and rescue by the occupants. Okay, and then it goes on at the end to say automatic transmission of fire signals is also necessary in the case of residential care premises. So what it's saying there is you cannot delay the call to the fire service at all. Okay, so manual summoning is fine, but if you can't guarantee that someone will call them straight away, you need to have an automatic means. Okay, that automatic means again cannot be delayed. As you saw earlier, if that had been it's 12 minutes before anyone rang the fire service, they could have took 12 minutes off that straight away.
And this applies only to category L systems?
Yes, absolutely. It applies to anyone with life safety. And really this bit is saying where it's critical, where you've got occupants that aren't able to move themselves, such as nurses, hospitals and care premises.
I had a recent news that certain people with fire alarms reps have been disconnected. Yeah,
CFOA, Chief Fire Association, came up with a plan and said actually, and this is more to do with false alarms, saying if you keep on having false alarms, because it's a massive drain on resources, if you keep on having false alarms, we will stop our call out. This is only from automatic call outs, it's not from 999 calls. And they're basically categorised in 3 ways. Category green, or green traffic light, is your system rings them, you don't have false alarms ever, they're going to come out, not a problem. The next one is amber, and what that might mean is, and each fire service has their different way of doing this. The first one might be, well actually, it's a normal turnout, but they won't put the blue lights on, they'll just drive there, because the chances are it's going to be a false alarm. Or some other people said, well, we normally get 2 tenders, we're just going to send 1. But even maybe someone on an outrider, someone on a motorbike coming out to check. Okay, so that's an amber. And then the last one is red, as in your system rings the fire brigade up, or whatever means, they will not respond unless you have a 999 call. Now Cambridge have certainly done that, because I've seen the letter they've sent out. But again, it's only through automatic. If it's a 999 call, the fire service have to respond. Okay. But interestingly, in both this document and the HTMO 503, the NHS document, does state that a 999 call must be made. Okay. Automatic means as well, if you want, but a 999 call has to be made. Okay. There are some ways you can delay it, but it's very, very long to go through, and it's up to the fire service and the hospital that maybe want to do that. Okay, staged fire alarms, another way of looking at it. Okay, so recommendation for staff alarm or staged alarms is, in residential care premises, a staff alarm should not incorporate any delay. Okay, this is where you allow the staff. Okay, so sorry, shouldn't have incorporate any delay in summoning the fire and rescue service. They should come out straight away. However, you may delay the general alarm to the building itself. Okay, providing all staff are made aware of the fire signal. So that says, in certain situations, you may not want to let the residents know, because if they're infirm, they can't move, no point telling them there's a fire at that point. If they're relying on you to get them out anyway, why worry them? So it's saying, make sure the staff are aware, make sure the fire brigade are aware, and then you can control it in that way. So, if you're a premises management, just spoke about earlier, what should you do? Well, pre-system design or installation, you need to carry out and record a risk assessment. Okay, if it's less than 5 people, that risk assessment doesn't need to be written down. Okay, but it's hard to prove that you've done a risk assessment if you haven't written it down and it's in your head. Okay, consult the guidance notes supporting the regulatory form order, and if you're on the government website, there's all sorts of guidance and help on there. Consult other interested parties, building control and insurers. Okay, insurers are key, because if you have got this auto dialer and you're on a red or amber with the fire service, they're going to want to know about that, because if you have a fire, they're not going to come out. Okay, decide on the level of protection required, so M, P, L, whatever's required there. Consider the cause and effect and document it, and appoint, and this is CFOA saying this, a third-party company to design, install, commission and maintain. Now, as an end user, an occupier, responsible person, however you look at it, it's your responsibility to make sure everyone that's working on your system is competent. That is an awful word to use, because how do you prove competency? It's more or less impossible. Okay, you can go on word of mouth. We would always recommend, there are companies out there that are third-party accredited. We'll look at the accreditations in a minute, that have design installation capabilities. Okay, so they'll be able to help you out. So what are the third-party accreditation schemes? There's one called LPS 1014. Has people heard of that before? Yeah. LPS 1014 covers everything within fire alarms. So to get LPS 1014 accreditation, you need to be able to design a fire alarm correctly, install a fire alarm correctly, install, commission a fire alarm, and maintain it. So you need to be able to do all 4. Okay, great. Okay, but actually not many companies do that. In terms of building consultancy practices, they could never do that, because they're not going to install, so they could never get certification for third party, design a fire alarm system. Okay, so another one came out, BAFE SP203. Okay, identical to LPS 1014 except it's modular. You can just do the design module, you can just do the install module, you can do the maintenance module or the commissioning module. Okay, but if you have all 4 of those modules, it's identical to an LPS 1014. Okay, the only thing I would say is that BAFE also has modules for fire extinguishers. So be careful if people are coming out saying I'm fully BAFE certified, just do a check on the BAFE website that they can do what they're being asked to do. Okay. Interestingly, LPS 1014, I think there's only 12 companies in the whole of the UK that have that, because it is such a big module to get. Mentioned earlier, a standard on door closers, 7273 Part 4. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but there is a standard revised in 2015, if anyone's aware of it, and it basically says that door holders, if you've got a building and it's got fire dampers everywhere, it's got fireproof walls, all this sort of thing, but actually fire doors are the worst thing you can do, especially if you open it, because what you've done is put a massive hole in the fire compartment. So you need to make sure you've got control of that in the event of a fire. Okay, so we've always done that before, door magnets, relay, switches off. But actually, in the event of a fail, okay, so someone moves a detector near the door, or the fire alarm stops communicating with that interface, or there's a short circuit across the door holder, not necessarily going to close the doors. 7273 Part 4 states it must be fail safe. So if you lose battery power, if you lose communication, if you get short circuit, open circuit, the door must fail safe. Okay, now, it's a small standard, it's only about, 30 pages long, but the design part of it overrules 5839 Part 1, okay, in terms of detector spacings. So it's definitely a document you should be aware of if you're designing to L5 or L4 category. L1, L2, L3 it says is fine, but L4 or L5, you need to read that standard. Okay. So, old documentation. So, previously, years ago, the fire service used to come out, they'd walk around your building, they'd inspect it, and they'd go, oh, you need a detector there, you need an extinguisher there, you need a emergency light there. Okay, and then you'd go off and do that, and if you didn't, you would take it to court, but you went off, did that, they'd come back and issue a certificate, fire certificate. Okay, that's how it worked. Gone. Doesn't exist anymore. The fire service will not do that. And the reason is what we said earlier, the fire service is now policing that. So they're not going to come out and hold themselves responsible for something. Okay? So now, what do we have to do? You need to carry out a risk assessment if you're an occupier. Talked about it already, lots. You need to make sure it's in line, and you need to keep records for the entire life of your system. The fire service can turn up at any point to your premises and say, show me your documentation. If you haven't got it, they're not going to take court straight away, but they'll say you need to make sure it's here in, they'll give you time, 3 months, whatever. If it's still not there, as you'll see later on, the fines are massive. Okay. Now, when I first started doing this back in 2006, 2007, everyone was like, never happens. They won't do that. We're seeing now, I don't know if anyone gets an FIA newsletter, you'll see month in, month out, people are going to court, and it's not just big companies, it's small shops, it's churches, it's all sorts of things. So they're really pushing on this. So just last couple of slides now, examples of poor design, installation, servicing. Okay, using non-accredited people. So we've got some designs here. A couple of things that point out there. One, it's too close to a wall, and it's right next to an air conditioner and next to a heat source, which is a light. So that's just to ease you in. It gets better. This is in a hotel where the owner of the hotel did not want to see the smoke detector. So the installer says, I've got a great idea. I can cut holes in your ceiling. I can mount them in there, then put a nice brass cover over the top, which is great unless you have a fire, which it will never penetrate up there because the heat barrier will stop it. But that's for open areas. If you want specialist applications, this one's probably one of my favourites. This is to detect curtain fires, I think, and that's all it will do. So someone's put a detector around the curtain because it was a big art room full of art. I mean, just around here, there's works of art worth millions. So they didn't want that in the way. So that's what the installer came up with. So it's not just about the end users looking at things. Designers need to take responsibility as well. So then we come on to a chart. Now, I've updated this one. So
question. So you mentioned maintaining records of the whole life.
Absolutely.
So that means that each version of the risk assessment, since this system
should be in place, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. In terms of the fire alarm system, because we don't get really involved in this yet. In terms of the fire, all the maintenance certificates need to be done, but the risk assessment, I think the latest version is fine because you're covering the building as it is.
Okay.
Okay, but maintenance needs to prove that everything's been done on the maintenance of the fire alarm system.
There's a maintenance log must be kept.
Yeah, absolutely.
The time it's installed, the time it's decommissioned.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem.
Is that a separate logbook attached to the building?
It's a separate, yeah, it's definitely, yeah. You've got the fire alarm logbook, which you have to write down your tests, any faults, anything like that in there. That has to go with the fire alarm panel. But also there should be a separate book. Normally you'll see, certainly on new buildings, you'll see a document box now, and that's where the document's going, because it's no longer just a small folder, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
How practical is that though, really? When a building changes hands, as a purchaser...
We'll come on to that, because there's ways of overhauling that. So we'll see the certification in a minute, but there is something called a verification certificate, which there's 4 main certificates that cover a fire alarm system. If you don't have them, you can get a verification. So if you're brand new to a building, you can get a verification. So you take risk assessment, that'll say you need a fire alarm to this. You can then get a specialist company in to go, right, I'm going to verify that the design you've got is correct to the category, that the installation is correct, that it's been commissioned correctly with a cause and effect, and that replaces all of the documentation. There's a cost associated with that, with a company coming in to do that though, because as you can imagine, it's a lot of work.
Yeah, but you can't just magic historical.
Of course you can't, absolutely, absolutely. And the whole idea of the verification was to cover buildings that still have the fire certificate, which doesn't really mean anything anymore. So this is undetected fires in commercial premises. Now, the number of fires is around 2,500 to 3,000 fires a year undetected. What I don't know is the percentages. Now, some are fairly obvious, missing batteries, whatever. But system turned off 19. But the biggest kind of chunk in all of these is the fire products did not reach the detector. So, i.e., smoke detector was installed where there should have been a heat detector or vice versa. Or poor sighting of detectors, like it was tucked behind a curtain or whatever. So that's the biggest thing. It doesn't seem to change year in, year out, which is shocking. Okay, it's gone down since the early 2000s, well, mid-2000s. I just wanted to highlight that to say, the biggest cause of systems still not going off is that people are not designing them correctly in the first place. Okay, the British Standard, there's a whole section dedicated to stopping false alarms. Okay, as a designer, but as manufacturers, we also have to look at it because it's the biggest drain on the fire service. Standard false alarm costs about £4,016 per false alarm, and there's a lot of false alarms that go off. So, documentation for new systems. Okay, there's 3 certificates. You have to have a design certificate, and that will also be sent with a set of as-fitted drawings. Okay, so that's part of the certification. You then got an installation certificate that's got the installed diagrams and everything you need, the wiring certificates and all that, test certificates. You then have a commissioning certificate that's signed by the guy commissioning it to say it's done in accordance with the cause and effect. And then the last one, which I've never seen, is the acceptance certificate. And that's the end user saying, okay, I've got all the documentation, I'm formally accepting the system belongs to me now. So all the installers out there should be fighting for these, but for some reason they never asked for them. This is an ideal world, when someone that wrote the standard probably hasn't installed a fire alarm system, I don't know. So in addition to that, there's inspection and maintenance certificates by providers. They'll come out every quarter, every 6 months, whatever's required under the risk assessment, and they'll do an inspection of the fire alarm system. Okay. There's also something called a modification certificate, and this is really where you're doing an extension to a building, or it's just a small area of a building that you're changing. Okay, rather than go through design, install, commissioning certificate again, you can do a modification that encompasses all of it. How big is totally up to the individual, but if you're going from scratch again, you might as well do the whole certification again. Okay, but obviously that goes with the as-fitted drawings and the IE regs and all that sort of things, and that's the owner's responsibility to provide that to the fire service if they ask for it. Okay. So the users now got their fire alarm system. What are their responsibilities? Okay, it's all right to say blaming other people, but it still comes down to the end user. So there's certain things they have to do. They have to ensure that they have the correct documentation, which is hard to do if they're not fire alarm specialists. That's why we have to guide them. They have to appoint a responsible person or premises management, depending on if it's BS or regulatory form order, to check the system is operating on a daily basis. Okay, sounds quite onerous. All that really means is look at the fire alarm panel on the way into work. Has it got a green light on it? Because that's good. Has it got any amber lights? Because that's bad. Okay, if it's got red lights, that's even worse because it means you've got a fire. Carry out and record a weekly test. Has to be done. Record in the logbook. Maintain all the records. ensure all the occupants are aware of what to do in the event of a fire. Okay, because we saw before, it's their responsibility. Maybe they don't have to do the training themselves, but they should get someone in who is competent to train their staff. Make sure there's spares available on site. We're seeing that less and less these days because detectors seem to last a lot longer than they used to, and cool points are all resettable elements now, you don't tend to have the glass elements. And appoint a third-party accredited service organisation to maintain the system. Now, that's our personal thing, because again, it's proving competency. It just says a competent company, but... So, summary to the various part of fatal inquiry. Some of these are quite shocking, to be honest. So what did they find out? What were they saying was the cause of it? Well, unclear information at the alarm panel. We saw that zone chart, and nowadays it is, as you said before, a diagrammatic zone chart. Not retrospective, but in reality, best practice now is saying that's what needs. There's been a fire, people have died because of that. So even if you're an owner-occupied building, for the cost of someone printing out a zonal diagram of your building, do it, because it's seen as best practice. There was no instruction received by the nurse in charge in relation to the new fire alarm system. Okay, there was no immediate call to the fire alarm to the fire service, which 12 minutes that could have been vital time. The exhibition of a prominent display in the matron's office of a laminated sheet specifying clearly what information. And that's really basic saying there should have been a sheet in the matron's office near the phone that says, in the event of a fire, ring this number. Here's the address, really tough line for line. And that's in conjunction with the call to the fire service we said earlier, 5-minute call, what information do you want?
Is that a requirement of the BS, or is it mentioned in there?
No, this is, sorry, it's not, which bit?
The fact that there's the suggested text to say to a fire alarm.
No, this is what the inquiry looked at and said this is what should have happened. This is why, this is the cause of it.
Support that, because as a sailor, I'm not sure a sailor in this room, most people on a boat will say that they have the emergency plan written down there, which when you get on the phone, it actually says the words you are to talk about.
Absolutely.
So all
under duress, absolutely. You don't know what you're saying. Someone got the address wrong. It's not in the BS. There's a lot of things, common sense, are not in the BS, which is a shame. In my opinion, when I'm telling someone a new fire alarm, I say best practice is have something. You see it on the HSE. Most buildings have a plaque on the wall that says, in the event of fire, ring 999. Here's the address. Here's the person in charge. Why not do that for a fire alarm system as well? Okay. So there was defective maintenance on the electrical installation. That's what caused the fire. There was inadequate staff training. There was no checking of documentation. Say no checking. People may have checked it, but it was unclear if anyone ever checked this installation data, whether it was done correctly. Okay, so assuming it wasn't ever done correctly. And the assurance as to the competency of the fire risk assessor. There's no statutory regulations at the time as that you have to have a third-party accredited risk assessor. Still don't know if it is now, but in my opinion, best practice, because as a responsible person, you need to prove that you've done your best to make sure that everyone in charge or anyone doing anything on the fire alarm is competent. Okay, the cost of fire. So we see here, door wedged open, after, looks like that. We called a fire door, we've got self-closers for a reason, and it's not to be wedged open. Obstructions in corridors, as I said, cause major, that times you see this in a care home, in schools, all sorts of things, but in the event of fire, and you can't see where you're going, they will cause people. The shocking thing regarding that, no one was ever prosecuted over that fire. Okay, which is kind of beyond belief. But the legislation that was in place there didn't put anyone responsible. So they couldn't charge people.
Possibly under Health Safety Work Act Section 2 of the employer's duty.
Couldn't. No one was ever done. This went on for 10 years, this inquiry.
Is that different from Scotland and England? Well,
I think, yeah, the rules have changed significantly over all sorts of things, but at the time, there's no statutory requirement to carry out risk assessment. One wasn't really done correctly. There's no statutory requirement to fit sprinklers, which there is now, so they weren't fitted. And it's just typical of, people doing the job, the minimum they need to do to get a job signed off and done. Shocking. But legislation standards these day and age. I mentioned earlier, no one's above the law. A couple of slides now to show you. So, co-op and influence, I read about this. So this is talk about the legislation now. There's a co-op down in Sussex, and they pleaded guilty to a breach of fire safety regulations. So this back in 2005. Regulations of the 2005. So the rear emergency doors were locked, the emergency exits using a security code. the fire alarms were not regularly tested, the call points for the fire alarm were obstructed, and the store manager was not up to date with his fire safety training. Now, they didn't have a fire there. This is just the fire service going in and say, prove to us you've got everything covered under the regulatory form order and the fire safety part of that. They couldn't. £200,000. You think, yeah, it's a one-off. No. Pub, B&M, celebrity hairdressers, New Look, Tesco's, Greggs the Baker, Shell, as I said, churches, small shops, everyone is being done for not having this sort of documentation. It's really pushing it down now to the end user to say, look, we're not joking anymore, people's lives are in danger, you need to get the certification, you need to do everything that's in that regulatory form order because his lives are at risk. The New Look was a bit different because there was actually a fire there, but the issue they had there is the store staff continued to serve customers and let customers in to buy products, even though the second floor is on fire. So we laugh, you know. People shouldn't be allowed in, but you can see the staff thinking, bonus, ching, 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 get them in, get them out. So
but it's also the customer's fault as well. Really.
The customer should have gone in, but
it's just human. There's something that's
absolutely,
human behaviour.
absolutely. So start at the very start, and we're going to finish on that. Some key stage to consider: risk assessment. We've drummed on it about so much. It is vital. It's vital, not just for the fire alarm designers and that sort of thing, but also for an end user as a responsible person. It's your legal document. You need it. Design with 5839. Make sure the category is identified. Cause and effect. Your fire evacuation plan. Make sure it's written down. Okay, what happens? Look at the other standards. Make sure it's commissioned with the full cause and effect. Someone's sat down and gone through that for a reason. Okay, it needs to be commissioned like that. Make sure you train the staff. Make sure the system's maintained, and make sure the system's kept up to date as the building changes. And with that, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Any questions?
Please. The initial certification sort of changed over the years. Is it for the building control officer as opposed to the fire officer?
Certification in terms of?
You've asked there principally for 4 documents. We're more likely to be dealing with the certification on new premises.
Yeah.
To be signed off by the building control officer.
This is signed. No, these documents are signed off by the person in charge. So a design certificate is signed off by the person who designed that fire alarm system. Okay, with the as-fitted drawings or the original design. The installation certificate is signed by the person who is responsible for overseeing the installation, a named person. Okay, the commissioning signed off by the commissioning engineer, and the maintenance signed off by the maintenance engineer. And the whole point of that is the end user is responsible for collating all that together. That's theirs. That's proof their system has been designed in accordance with the regulations that are set down. It is their responsibility. It's not up to building control to check that or anything like that. They can do, but it's not their responsibility. The end user's responsibility, that named person. If someone dies in a fire or something goes wrong, they will literally go, was the system designed correctly? Let's get in the designer. That's why it's a named person, because it's a blame culture. Did you design it correctly? Prove it. There it is. Did you install it as per that? Yes. Okay, you're off the hook. Next one. Did you commission it as per the original cause and effect that was laid down in the documentation that the end user still got? No. You're the one going to court for that reason. So it really is a blame culture. That's why it's now named people. It's no longer a company that's signing it. It is a named person, which is all the more reason to get people that are third-party accredited, because if you're not, what have you got to hide? Why wouldn't you have that? It's people's lives that you're signing.
It'll still track back to the employing organisation at the time, though, through vicarious liability, wouldn't it?
It does, but it's a named person. It has to be on there now. That's the key thing.
Yeah.
And it may be that actually you've got all those certificates, but as an end user, you didn't check their competency of any of it, and actually what they installed is rubbish because your risk assessment was rubbish. It'll be you as the end user going to court and explaining that you thought best because you thought you'd save a couple of quid here. So it really is a blame culture, really pushing down to individuals now as who's responsible.
So is it best to go down the LPS 1014 route?
Makes no difference. If you know, as a consultant's practice, if you want to be able to sign off designs, BAFE is the way forward because you can get a certification just for design. Okay. If you want LPS 1014, you would have to then prove to the company, LPCB, that you can install, that you can commission, and that you can maintain fire alarms, and you'll be checked on that twice a year. So it's a no-go. There's no way you go down that route. You would go down the BAFE route and get your design, and then prove twice a year that your design is correct. And likewise, if you're just install and that's all you do, you install fire alarms, you're a specialist in it, you can get third-party accredited certificate to say you're an approved installer. You can install fire alarm systems correctly.
Yeah. Challenging your third-party accreditation thing, I totally agree with the principle, but also I would suggest that you don't use the same third-party year on year for the same principle you don't use yourself in the system. You need to have continual independent verification of the system. If you do use the same person, the person doing that is not competent in appointing that person in doing so.
Yeah, I mean...
And you could use a separate engineer, and then the same company, different engineer,
yeah.
but it's the fact that it's the same person, you need that independence.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly in terms of the BAFE, there's a lot of companies that do the checking of that. Yeah. There's the BSI have their own department that do it. You've got NSI. There's 4 or 5 different companies that do it. NACOS, another one. And it's strange because they're all supposedly certifying or assessing to the same degree. I know for a fact NSI definitely check a lot more detail than any other of the companies. I mean, maybe because they've got a PDA and they've got sets of questions that they'll go tick, 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 tick. Whereas other people go, right, let's have a look at that drawing or that, prove to me you've done this, that and the other.
So would you advise, I think you probably would, that any designer undertaking a design for fire safety system gets an independent check of their own system as well? Say
twice a year, maybe more, that a company comes in to assess it and they pick at random.
Of the design. So if you're doing a design of our system, what's your opinion getting another company?
I don't think my personal opinion is I wouldn't get someone else to check my design, because if I'm not competent in doing that design, if I'm not confident, I wouldn't sign off in the first place.
It's in the check of the risk assessment that leads to the design.
Yeah, maybe the risk assessment. It's up to the risk assessment is owned by the owner of the premises, so they may decide that they want that. Note it down. Not a problem at all. All that's happening is that end user, that ultimate responsible person, has to prove they have done everything in their power to prove the people they're using are competent.
Because the issue with risk assessments is they're subjective, and you have 3 people in the room,
absolutely.
You get 3 different.
I know you can, absolutely. And you know what? That's the sad thing, that the fire service are not coming out to check anymore, because they say as long as you've got a risk assessment, they're not bothered. And it's a horrible wet business to be, because that risk assessment could be absolute tosh. It may mean absolutely nothing. But all fire service can say, have you got a risk assessment? Yeah, right, that's your responsibility, so we assume you've got it correct. Have you got design certificates? Have you got all this? Fine, off we go. Which is the wrong way, in my opinion, but...
I just see that it's a real problem trying to get that across to the client, really.
It is, and that is a big issue, because they have this massive responsibility that's been dropped on them. Apparently it was advertised in major newspapers, it was on the radio, it was on the TV. I certainly never saw anything on the radio or TV. But yeah, it's their ultimate responsibility, and I don't know how that gets across to an end user.
So why don't designers pick this up and ask for the risk assessments and insist upon them?
Honestly, the real truth, they do. But what they'll be told is, we haven't got it. I'm a contractor, you need to give me a price by... Yeah. So all the companies that we work with are third-party accredited, else we don't work with them for a start. But the amount of times I've done this CPD and all CPDs, I say, to get a risk assessment, they go, never see it. Would you ask for it? Yeah, but what'll happen is the contractor will come to us, here's the price, here's the design, give us a price on it, and you go, where's the risk assessment? They go, if you don't want the job, fair enough. And they'll give it to someone else. It's a real sad state to be in, but that's what's happening.
Is that what you do as a company? So
we're purely a manufacturer. We just manufacture fire alarm systems. That's it. So we don't see risk assessments at all. But the companies we work on our behalf that do design, install, commission, very rarely see them. You get the odd end user, so universities, hospitals, no problem at all. Well, they're government owned, I suppose. But if it's independent, you go to a small care home, where's your risk assessment? You don't have one. You can bring it to attention you need one, but how far do you push it? In the fire service, I suppose. Guess what? They haven't got one. But you know, there's only so much you can do. Yeah, sure.
See, as a contractor, we still do design and build as well. But to get a risk assessment, we don't very rarely work for the end user. We work for a main contractor.
And this is the other issue. Where's it coming from? Now, on a straightforward site, bear in mind I'm only talking theoretical, I didn't write all the standards. If it's a straightforward site, so it's a new build, there's the site. Whoever is the main contractor, the responsible person for that site, is responsible for that risk assessment at that point. Because it's not just talking about risk assessment for a completed building, it's also fire risk assessment as the building's going up. So the main contractor is ultimately responsible, the named person, the person overseeing it all, is the responsible person to make sure the safety of everyone on that site.
You pay, never mind, you give you a risk assessment.
Exactly, and this is the problem.
I'll give you a solution to your question there. As a contractor, my suggestion is you request a meeting with the principal designer, who has the duty to identify all the risks, etc., and he should communicate to you. If he fails to meet with you, report it to HSC because he's not doing his job. He is the one that has the duty to provide that information to
You
you.
probably get thrown off the job.
And you'll never work with them again.
He's independent main contractor,
Yeah.
unless he's a B&B principal designer.
But that's the problem these days. Most of the architects and all that on a lot of D&Bs are novated back to the builders, so the architects don't want to get involved.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And yet, of course, because they've been novated and they want the money back off the builder as well.
So in my personal opinion, if we get a fire alarm system and someone says, design this fire alarm system, as I said earlier, the best thing I can do, there's a couple of things. If I was to design a science certificate and I've not been told the category, I would either go L1, worst case scenario, it covers everything, you can't go wrong with L1, or in the back of the British Standards, under Annex 2, Annex A, okay, it does give you an idea of different types of building and what the British Standard would recommend that being covered to, okay. If you don't know and you haven't got that information, you say, I've designed it based on this from the British Standard, which is the code of practice for designing fire alarms in commercial premises. You can't really be wrong, can you?
But you just have to produce the lowest possible solution because you have that risk assessment.
Absolutely.
Question: what advice for training would you offer to a client for doing the being a responsible person? Would you, for example, suggest the NEBOSH course? What's your opinion, the NEBOSH fire safety course? In terms of the risk assessment,
so we don't really get involved. I would always recommend a UCAS accredited company, but also as the person, because there's several ways you can do it. Some people can do it. We were talking earlier. The government has on their website under just type in risk assessment, 12 guides, okay, guide to risk assessment on your premises. So it's for anyone really. You pick the guide that's closest to your premises. There's one on commercial premises, there's one on hotels, one on healthcare centres, one on educational centres, that sort of stuff. You pick that, you can do it yourself.
Yep.
You're the person signing that off at the end of the day. Or you can get an accredited company to come and do that for you. My personal opinion, have both if you can. Because a risk assessor can come in, but how does he know what that empty room is going to have in it if you're not there telling him? It could be empty when he's there, but actually the next day could have gas canisters in there and flamethrowers and all sorts. So it's best that both of you work together and come up with a thing. And again, once he's left or she has left and you've got that risk assessment, it needs to be monitored and regularly reviewed.
But that's why the client's got to be the best person, the owner of the system,
Absolutely.
because he's to implement it.
Absolutely.
He doesn't know what's written by the third party. How's he going to understand how to implement and monitor it?
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier, a building goes up and D&B, so well, maybe just it's a building's gone up, okay, it's completely empty. So there you've got an empty building with a fire alarm in that's suitable for the empty building at that time. But when someone occupies that, it's their responsibility as the occupier to go, right, I need to now carry out risk assessment and see if what I've got is adequate or I need to put more in. Or even less, could be less in that situation. It's not just making sure you've got the right cover, it's making sure you're minimising false alarms as well.
Thank you.
No problem. Sure.
With regards to the competent person, for designers that is, did you say you can actually go to the website of those two accrediting companies and find out companies or individuals?
Yes, companies. Doesn't tell you the individual. It tells you the company, but someone within that company will be them.
So anybody doing design?
If they, well, let's say it's not a legal requirement. It's not a gas safe. You have to have it. Okay, but in my personal opinion, you need to prove that the people you're doing design, or the people that are doing designs for are competent. How do you prove that? It's impossible, isn't it? So my personal opinion is get someone who's actually been third-party accredited, and someone said, actually, yeah, they can design that fire alarm system because I've seen them design it, and I've been to site where I've seen it installed. It's correct to British standards. But yeah, the base one certainly. You can type in the 3 letters of a company name, type in postcode, whatever you want. But the base one's good because it does tell you what certifications they've got. I mean, I've been to somewhere, so I said, BAFE, definitely. You go on it, yes, they are for for extinguishers, but they wouldn't actually design a fire alarm system. So just be careful with the BAFE one because it is modular. LPS 1014, not a problem because it has to be all 4 modules.
So there's only about 12 of those?
There's only about 12, yeah. Less and less since BAFE came out. Whether it's down to cost, I've got no idea. But
yeah, but once again, I mean, to come back to the competency thing, I agree with you, it's difficult, but an accreditation, a company accreditation, is not an indication of individual person's competency.
No, not at all.
You make an assumption, potentially wrongly, that individual is, should we say, capable.
Absolutely.
To do the job that he's been employed to do.
Another way, certainly in terms of design, another way of doing it is, the FIA run training courses on BS 539 Part 1, and there's 2 or 3 units to that. There's Part 1 day, and then there's 2 more days that go on from that. And just seeing someone's certificates to prove they've done that, you have to pass the test to complete it. That's proving competency. It's halfway take it. As an end user, you have to prove that you've gone out of your way to prove that people working in your system are competent.
Yes.
And it's easier to say, okay, I got third party accreditation, because if something does happen, worst case, you can at least say, I did my best, rather than just go, he was cheap. Seemed like he knew what he was doing. So it's just covering yourself, that's it.
That's what we were just saying. So for us wanting to undertake future training, would you, what training would that be? Would it be the FIA BS 5839 course, and would it be also, there are other ones as well, you can get training, I think, in Part B of the
there's also, I mean, we don't get involved. The FIA used to allow us to train people, they don't anymore. Keep it in-house, I'm guessing. But yeah, certainly if you're designing fire alarms, there's a FIA Unit 1, which is BS 5839, which is a day's course on basic design of fire alarm system. And then there's a 2-day course after that, which goes more in depth on tricky calculations of sensor spacings and sounder spacings. There's also courses on maintenance from the FIA on BS, and also courses on commissioning and that sort of thing as well. So the FIA, you go on their website, they've got all their courses listed there, and there is obviously a fee to go on them, which is another reason they don't want us to do it, I think.
Any further questions for Neil?
Thank you for your time.
Can we
Appreciate that.
Your certificates at the front. Before you go, there's still some food there at the back, so help yourself. Either take it with you or do something with it. Next week's presentation is our membership evening. Those who haven't brush up on the membership, please feel to come along and see what's on offer. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's really great.
So thank you very much for that. It was,
no problem at all. It's quite a